So I want to draw a distinction between two characters that we see often. This helps us in terms of finding in ourselves whether we have gone internally and found our genuine authority, or whether we are using external authority and sort of using that lower level material world power, or we're using that internally found intuitive power, genuine power that doesn't seek to control. External power would seek to control. So we're going to look at two characters. The first character, I'll draw a couple of sort of parallels between the distinguished characters. So, same category and how they express it differently. So, first one we have is like Jafar and Aladdin. Okay, so Aladdin is like the diamond in the rough, able to enter into the cave of wonders. Jafar has the gift, is politically savvy, has the ear of the Sultan. And so the Sultan is convinced by Jafar in many cases. Jasmine, who represents the anima, is not convinced by Jafar and is even suspicious and knows when Aladdin is lying until he comes clean and finds his own inner authority instead of trusting and leaning on the genie's power. Then we have like Gaston and the Beast in Beauty and the Beast. Gaston represents masculine brute force. I think somewhere in the song he like eats dozens of eggs a day or something like that. He's the strong, very physically strong, externally powerful, respected. And then you have the Beast, who lives in exile and essentially is going through the journey of integrating with his anima, or having Belle fall in love with him, and then before the time is up, if Belle falls in love with him, then the curse is broken, and now he has integrated his opposite sides. This represents the Beast within, or Hades in the underworld, having Persephone or the anima fall in love with him, and us integrating our masculine and feminine sides. And then we have power not by just brute strength, external brute strength, but by an integration of the opposite in that sort of understated, gentler, but very powerful presence. Then we also have Scar and Simba. Scar basically has, appeals to the masses and the hyenas, and then takes power. And Simba has that birthright and goes through the process of going into exile and figuring out who he truly is, and then taking his rightful place in the circle of life. Scar had his kingship through deceit and lies, and running off his competition through essentially killing Mufasa and convincing Simba that he had killed Mufasa. So all of these are like the house of cards versus the house built upon a rock. So what's interesting is that in thinking about Neo, when he talks to the Oracle, he essentially, the whole movie is him going inward, like all these other heroes that we've mentioned, and finding that genuine power and authority within him, and instead of relying on, let's say, he's got the gift, so he can rely on the gift, and just, let's say, he continues on with Morpheus's belief in him, but he's like, I don't I don't really think I'm the one, but like, I'm gonna basically just go off of this and go through the movements here. It really helps in discernment between people that are speaking from their inner authority and people that are sort of relying on their gift. A lot of times, like the Jafar or the Scar, they can rely upon their charisma and their charm. And a lot of us have that natural gift. Like Hercules had that natural gift, but he had to learn how to harness it, channel it, and sort of channel it in a direction of a constructive, genuine power once he had faced his demons. And there is an interesting way to kind of pick up on this. And let's say character one, like the Scar, Jafar, essentially the one who hasn't gone inward to find their authority and relies on external authority. A lot of times when they are teaching, let's say, they want to rely on, they're like, okay, cite your sources. I'm going to rely on the academic institutions or some type of an external authority that has validated this fact. And then you have the other character that has lived it, has an intuitive knowing, and states it, from a lived experience, from a knowing. And so there's this the external, the first character values the external over the internal, and sort of the Aladdin trusts the internal, and speaks intuitively. When these characters that have gone within and trust their inner authority, what they speak is simple. What they speak is understated. What they speak is accessible. And the true sort of sign of the other character, the charlatan, when he explains something simple, it sounds complicated. It's inaccessible. The words are verbose or big, and there are ways that you can kind of pick up on the smoke and mirrors of the external authority that the person is relying upon rather than internal authority. So I have here, they're like playing this role, and they have impressive speech, and it's loud, and there's no restraint. Confidence in the external authority valued above internal authority. Yes, explains simple concepts in a complicated and inaccessible way. And on the other side, you have this intuitively internal driven person that has dropped those roles, and is being authentic, has this understated speech. There's restraint. There's almost a quiet confidence. There doesn't need to be this Gaston puffing of the chest. These characters, a lot of the time, they'll say something, but it's not necessarily going to call your attention. And only after the fact, when you see it, because you are running into something in the real world, you're like, oh, they were right about that. And then that is that true power, because they didn't have to tell you to believe in what they said. They didn't have to shout it at you. They stated a simple truth that they knew because maybe they lived it, and they had the experience. And then you come to say, oh, they didn't even really call my attention there. They just said this. A lot of times, these intuitive people that trust their internal authority, they are not super respected among, let's say, academics. Academics will not accept that, because it's like, oh, you cite your source. You're like, I don't know. That's something I've lived. I don't know. I just know it. And a lot of the movies that you see is essentially, the Hercules that's born with so much strength, but then that strength ends up being destructive until they meet their mentor or guide or trainer or coach. And that coach, which in Hercules, it's half man, half goat. And what's interesting is that the sign of Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, has the goat as its animal that's associated with it. And so I forgot the name of Hercules' trainer, but Hercules basically needs to show that discipline and channel that strength, and so that his power is not just shooting off in all directions and knocking over the pillars like in the beginning scene. So the hero essentially needs to learn restraint. And somebody who's naturally gifted can go one of two directions. One, they can kind of say like, all right, I'm going to grab for power, and I'm going to persuade people with my education and my articulate speech, and I'm going to sort of charm my way like Jafar up the ranks. And then there is the other side of the coin, where the genuine, internally motivated hero has more of a quiet presence, but a lasting and enduring power that doesn't collapse like a house of cards, but has a firm foundation, which is also another Capricorn association. So there are a lot of parallels to the heroes that have gone internally, have legs to stand on. They have a foundation to stand on. They're Neo. After Neo recognizes that he is the one, he's no longer fighting agents and dodging bullets, but he is holding up his hand, and he doesn't need to dodge the bullets because he's sort of exited the matrix, and the spoon bends because he realizes there is no spoon. And an interesting story that I have resonated with a lot recently is the story of Icarus. And a lot of you probably know this, but he's the one that flies too close to the sun. The reason that is a problem is because his wings are put together with wax. And so Icarus is warned by his father to not fly too close to the sun. But there is something within all of us that that does want to test the limits and see how high we can fly. But the warning is essentially don't try to take on the weight of, let's say, the crown without the legs to stand on, without the foundation that's sure. Don't build your empire with a house of cards, because it's just going to collapse. So essentially, this is also shown with different scenes in different movies I've noticed. Like, for example, both Tron and Iron Man and a few others that I can think of, they're being pursued by, let's say, the enemy or an agent or whatever. And what they do is they fly straight up into the sky. And typically there's like, once they get out of this level of oxygen, there's like an engine failure, or, the way that their jet works is it stops working with a lack of oxygen. But if they are flying and they don't have wax wings because they have a foundation underneath them, they're able to go up in the sky and the enemy peters out a lot earlier than they do, and then they kind of recover, and then they have sort of dodged one of the attacks of the agent. And so the story of Icarus is very ubiquitous in a lot of these stories, where it's like, yes, you have the gift, but don't fly too close to the sun before you're ready. And essentially, this is something that has been really resonating with me recently. Just another example is in Dune. There's the Fade Ruatha and there's Paul Atreides. The Fade Ruatha is basically like, he fights in the Colosseum as a spectacle, and all of his opponents are drugged, and so he, typically very easily wins, but everybody cheers, and he's basically building his empire with a house of cards. Whereas Paul Atreides is fighting as well, but he's fighting in the desert. There are no spectators. There are just the people in the desert that are seeing this. And he's learning what he needs to learn, but there's not this sort of spectacle about it. It's a quiet learning experience and a training, whereas the other one is all for show, and it's gaining the masses, and it's kind of like emboldening the people to say, oh yes, this is our leader, look how strong he is, he can defeat all these enemies, when really they're all drugged and it's all just like for show, and it's keeping them all distracted from what's really happening. Then there is the scenes where essentially Paul and Fade Ratha have to fight in the end, and it's a question of whose wings are made of wax and who has a solid foundation underneath them. So we see this all over in the stories that we see, and we see this in real life, where there are certain tells when a person is basically speaking from a place of, it's loud, it's calling attention, it is valuing external authorities and saying, oh, trust me because, like in my case, I could say like, trust me because of my education. I'm a lawyer. And so when people hear that, they start to naturally believe a little bit more of what I say. So rarely do I say that, because it relies on this sort of house of cards. And it's, instead of doing that, I'll just say what I want to say, and then later on they can find out that, oh wow, he was right about that. Why? Because I lived it, maybe, let's say. And so when you hear a lot of times these people, that the first things you find out about them is what their credentials are, where their standing is in the social ladder, why you should believe them, and those types of things. And then they lean on those things. Maybe the person is like really good looking, and they lean on that, and people just believe what they say because they're very charming and they have that charisma, or maybe they have that external authority granted by an educational institution or something like that. Those are much more common. And then sometimes you run into the people where they're very understated, but they speak with a quiet confidence and power. And I know a few people like this, and when I walk away from talking to them, usually I'm not like, oh my gosh, like that was so amazing what they just said. But then let's say within the week following, I'll run into all these little things that affirm what they said. I'm like, whoa, she was right about that. And when she was saying it, I had no there was not this like shaking me by the shoulders, believe what I'm saying, I'm credible, you have to trust me, this type of thing. It didn't feel like I was being sold something. They were just sort of stating something, and I kind of just noted it and kind of moved on. And then let's say a day later, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what, because when she said that, and then I saw, oh my gosh, yeah. And then what happens is I will go inward and I'll say, oh, note to self, that person is actually very credible. Um, and instead of the person relying upon those credentials and those types of things, oh, okay, you're credible based on the fact that you're articulate, you're good looking, you're this, that, and the other. The smoke and mirrors look really good. And so I'm going to kind of believe what you're saying. I'll buy the product that you're selling. I'll buy the organization. I'll donate to the organization that you're representing, or I'll vote for the person I'll vote for you. And these types of things, because we're all, when it really comes down to it, we're all little promoters. We have our little things to promote, whether it be like the more people think that you are credible, the more influence you have, and then the more options you have. That's just kind of how it works. And so a lot of people will be like Icarus, and they'll fly too close to the sun, and then let's say that the flashy smoke and mirrors salesperson, let's say I drive the car off the lot and I realize, oh, this is not a V8, this is a V6, or so you kind of like, over time, both of their narratives prove either true or false, and you can see through. There are little tells that you begin to start to be able to discern both of them in the moment they're happening. A lot of times that understated person that speaks in such a way that you kind of can't figure it out, but you're like, man, I'm gonna kind of listen to what they're saying. They're not screaming it at me, but man, something about what they're saying holds some power, very quiet power. Like they're so self-assured because they found that internal authority, which is essentially what Neo had to find throughout the Matrix, and what really, Hercules had to find throughout, his journey as well. All of these heroes essentially have to find the hero within themselves. And, we all start off being able to be propped up by these external affirmations and things that are affirming, yeah, you've got it. You're doing everything that you're supposed to do. But then ultimately, the people who find their inner authority and don't need any of that, those are the people that when they speak, whoa, something happens where kind of it unfolds for days afterwards, and you're like, whoa, they were speaking with some inner authority, genuine authority, not some constructed authority, some worldly external authority that I just believed based on my tribal programming or whatever it is that we're running. And so essentially what the big pointer here is which type of authority do you want? Are you going to go for the quick win, the smoke and mirrors, the sort of the loud in your face, shaking people by the shoulders and telling them to believe you? Or are you going to do the very difficult thing of going inward, finding that inner authority, asking yourself the big questions, and having those questions answered by your internal authority, and then speaking with that true, authentic voice, which is a very vulnerable thing, and then have people hear it and not necessarily give you that immediate satisfaction of like, wow, you're so credible, And a lot of times people don't want to hear it because it would totally shake up their world. You know, if we're speaking from that internal authority and with our authentic voice, and we're going out into the world, we are going to rock some boats. Not intentionally, but because that truth is going to shake the foundations of all these houses of cards that are built all around us. And once we go inward and find our true voice, we find that there is a reason that we need to exercise some restraint. Because you can't just go around handing out red pills, that are going to break people's perception of their very reality, and then their whole world collapses because they built everything upon this blue pill, sort of the Matrix experience. And now, oh my gosh, this, so the people with that level of power that comes from within, they also are not given that power until they go through that process, largely because that power can be very destructive if there is no restraint exercised in this sort of in the administration of that power, in this sort of the words that we speak. Let's say that I go up to my friend and I say, hey, you're lying to yourself about the fact that that you think you're a big deal because of the position that you hold, but really you haven't faced any of your inner demons, and you are covering that up by everything that you're accomplishing in the world. I'm speaking from experience. This is not, no judgment whatsoever. It's a lot easier to cover up our deep shadow side with accomplishments that everybody around you is going to say, wow, okay, well, you're a lawyer and you're educated and you're articulate, so you got the pass from me. I'm not going to ask you any questions beyond that because you're credible. And then you've got the other people who don't necessarily have those external credentials, but they've gone through the work. And a lot of the times that means that what this means is they've gone in and confronted their shadows to be able to access that the lamp, the genie's lamp that grants them their wishes and essentially gives them that inner authority that Neo found in himself. And really going around and handing out red pills after that, you wouldn't do that because you realize what you had to go through to red pill when you did take the red pill was that the whole world that you knew collapsed. All the people that were sort of worshiping the ground that you walked on based on your accomplishments, now you're not going to stand on that anymore. And a lot of times what that means is you're put to the test and you lose all of that stuff. Your world collapses. Any house of cards that you have built, it falls. And then you can start building something on a true foundation with that inner authority. And that's when you start to speak from that place of power. Genuine power, not the power that seeks to control and manipulate and give you more power. This is the type of power where you are trusting your inner authority, you're speaking your authentic voice, and your words move mountains, because you could speak to somebody something that you have genuinely lived, and boom, it's going to awaken something within them, very similar to Morpheus saying, blue pill or red pill, and they take the red pill. That was essentially that was the moment where everything in Neo's previous world was gone. The ordinary world that he knew was gone. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've lived it. If you have lost everything and had to rebuild from there, and you chose to rebuild on a solid foundation, you know that your words are powerful, and you know that you have to exercise restraint because of the power of your words and because of the power of your very life and the way that you've lived it, the things that you've walked away from, and where you get your authority. Do you get your authority from some external source, or do you get it from the internal infinite source? And so it's pretty cool going into the world and seeing the telltale signs of where people are speaking from. Are you hearing, the Arthur who is pulling out the Excalibur, or are you hearing somebody who's going up to it and you're like, oh no, that doesn't quite land? Like the next day I woke up and I had buyer's remorse. Like, I actually didn't want that car. I just got sold, Whereas the other one is like, yeah, this is something that I genuinely needed to hear. And it kind of hurt because the truth does hurt sometimes. And it did activate and trigger something in me because it's uncomfortable to change. And what they're speaking, if it's true, means that I've got to change some things. It's a fun process. You all right, Scout? It's a fun process, and so I hope that some of this has kind of helped point out, this is the hero's journey, that a lot of these stories that we see are the hero going from, let's say, Aladdin having the genie and being able to put up this farce that he's a prince, and then he has to actually come out and tell the truth, and that truth holds so much power that he becomes an actual prince, and it isn't based on a house of cards anymore. So keep your eye out for that type of thing, and ask yourself the question of what you're willing to do to be able to speak with that inner authority and to speak with an authentic and genuine voice, that you have had to live some experiences and walk away from an ordinary world into the unknown and find out just what life has prepared for those that do things in a way that they're seeking to, have this genuine heart about it, and they're seeking to harness genuine and quiet power versus, the one that history tells the story over and over again. What happens when people seek external power? It corrupts them. What happens when the Gandhis, develop that internal genuine power? That one person can be more powerful than a whole empire that is seeking to control a population. So the Gandhis are rare. That's why all the movies are based on, the character that turns away from that external temptation of power and goes inward and finds that quiet, genuine power. So which one do you want to be? That's a decision that we all have to make ultimately. And that genuine power is a lot harder to get, and the results are a lot slower, and it's a lot quieter. So good luck out there. I hope you recognize how much more powerful a quiet, genuine power is than a loud external power. Good luck out there.